Welcome to Champions of Data and AI, brought to you by Databricks. Thousands of data leaders rely on Databricks to simplify data and AI, so data teams can innovate faster and solve the world's toughest problems. Visit Databricks.com to learn how data leaders are unlocking the true potential of all their data. In each episode, we salute champions of data and AI, the change agents who are shaking up the status quo. These mavericks are rethinking how data and AI can enhance the human experience. We'll dive into their challenges and celebrate their successes, all while getting to know these leaders a little more personally.
Welcome to the Champions of Data and AI. I'm your host, Chris D'Agostino, Global Principal Technologist at Databricks. Data democratization starts with disruptive leadership. When data leaders simplify the data architecture and empower data teams with the right tools and creative freedom to do their best work, they are able to create game-changing insights for their organizations. To dive into this topic, we are joined today by Stuart Hughes, Chief Information and Digital Officer at Rolls-Royce. He is a seasoned CIO with experience in many of the UK hot startups and dot-coms. Stuart's goal is to create a culture and environment for every member of his team to thrive. Let's get started. Welcome, and I guess to kick things off, I'll ask about what looks to be a Nerf gun behind you.
Yeah, so it's great to meet you, Chris, and great to be part of this. I spent the first 20 years of my life as a CTO in a lot of the UK's really fast-growing dot-coms, and kind of midway through my career, I pivoted to work for quite a traditional manufacturer. And as one of my many leaving presents, one of them's a poem on the other side, very odd. They gave me a Nerf gun that's got disruptor written on it, and I think it was that time where in the dot-com world, being a disruptor was like a really good thing. Whereas in a traditional manufacturer, I had to kind of spin it to be not disruptive internally, but a disruptor in manufacturing. So yeah, it was a really kind gift that someone gave me, and something I'll treasure forever.
Do you actually use it?
No, never. My son's actually got one of his own because he kept stealing it. So
yeah. Nice. So Stuart, you're from Manchester, England. What was it like growing up there?
So Manchester is the cool part of the UK, right? So I grew up in the era where Manchester United won every single trophy, every single game. I had a season ticket at the ground. Manchester was famous for music, so Manchester, Oasis. So when I grew up, kind of Manchester ruled the world, right? It wasn't just a city; it was kind of an attitude. And I guess in some ways, I've kind of personified that with how I am in my life. A little bit cocky, a little bit confident, you know, and always ready to take on that next challenge, never backing down. So yeah, coming from Manchester is kind of a really cool thing, something I really cherish.
Awesome. So in terms of the time when you realized you wanted to go into computer information systems, study that, make this kind of, your career track, what was the motivation there?
So it's really funny, right? So when I was 7, I was the computer monitor at school, right? And I don't just mean the computer monitor, but like if the computer's broke at school, it was go and get Stuart, he'll fix it, right? Nobody understood. I just unplugged it and plugged it back in, right? But so it kind of has always just been the thing that I did, and all I do now at Rolls-Royce is turn off and on again much bigger systems, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's gone from there. So yeah, I had that kind of natural interest. It wasn't in computer games, I had a ZX Spectrum. I used to code on that. It was more accidental coding. I'd do things, tempering, and it'd kind of go crazy. Yeah. And it just felt like a kind of natural extension in my life. But I feel like I was like a kid who was good at football, right? It was really easy to just carry on doing what I was good at. And I think even now I really enjoy what I do. I really enjoy being a technologist. The senior leader, senior executive, it's been a part of the role that I've learned, right? But if you're a T-shaped person, my T bit is that technical, used to be a developer, never wants to kind of let it go.
Yeah. Funny. When I was in high school, I we were doing all of our student government elections using paper ballots. And I was in the computer science club, and computers were really just coming out in terms of personal computers being widely available. And so I wrote the election software. And so true story, I literally wrote the election software, and with every vote, it would persist the results, the current state of the results, to a 5¼ inch floppy, floppy drive. And I happened to be running for president, and I won. And I promised that the voting, I really did. I promise. So this is 1987 South Lakes High School, or 86, I guess it would have been at the time. So, anyways, it was fun. And so hearing that you were the go-to person as well, we're sort of brothers in arms there. Let's see. So you've worked for a lot of different companies in your career, so you've had a lot of different experiences. What do you think is the most memorable achievement so far with the work that you've done?
Yeah, the obvious ones are like when we IPO'd Money Supermarket for £1 billion, or those corporate transactions. But I guess to think about it in my heart of hearts, it's a different answer. I worked at a company called the Hut Group. I joined really early on. We were probably turning over about £100 million, and to give you a contrast, about 6 years on, they just IPO'd for about 6 billion. So pretty successful now, but I joined really early on, and the way we had a website that sold CDs, DVDs, it was very specific, but we kind of knew as a leadership team that people weren't going to be buying CDs and DVDs on a website for much longer. So we had to pivot. And I'm not joking when I say it was probably in the last month of me working for the company. And in 2 weeks, we acquired a business and migrated them. And we'd actually migrated their website onto our tech stack before we'd actually signed the contract. And all we did, as soon as we signed the contract, it was ours. We just flipped the DNS and our website spun up. So, for me, those are the kinds of things that really get me excited, where, we did something in technology, we built a capability, and then it just dramatically changed the ambitions of that company.
And so your LinkedIn profile has an interesting quote from you. It says, "I'm an ex-developer frustrated by management, not creating the conditions for innovation and success. So I decided to try for myself." Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What was the experience in the environment that led to the frustration? And then sort of to follow on, what do you think you've been able to do in your career to invert that and make the developers' lives more enjoyable?
Yeah, and I think that, in a lot of the companies that I've led in, maybe the feedback I get from some of my team is you're too developer focused, right? So you're still thinking about the experience from the developer. But, I worked for some businesses where we were a .NET development team. We bespoke our web application. It was a good thing. And then we joined a part of a really large group, and their answer was, no, you need to migrate that stack from where you are, which is bespoke built for what you do, to our generic e-commerce engine built on Java, and go and convince your development team that that's a great idea. And it's like, there is no way you can convince them of that, And I think that it's those little things that, yes, it might make a great sense at a corporate level, but on the ground, it's absolutely not achievable. It's too high risk. And actually, why would you put the business through that risk? And those were the frustrations that I had. And I always felt that if I could be part of that decision and maybe steer it in, what is it you're actually trying to achieve? Because if it's reduced cost, our platform's like 1/10 of the cost of theirs anyway. I go back to the Hut Group where, we ran a website that was shipping about 6 million orders a year, and it ran on one rack of hardware. And people were coming in saying, we need to put Oracle in, we need to put these. And why do we need to put any of those things in? And it was just a complete misunderstanding of bespoke isn't always bad, right? Bespoke is, we're really good at the things that we're really good at. We're very efficient and we're very lean. What is it you want us to be good at, right? And I think that's the change now is I can ask that question right at the very beginning before the kind of big technology change starts to happen.
Well, and it's that, the simplicity of architecture sometimes is really valuable, right? And not overcomplicating the design. Now, sort of transitioning into today's modern data ecosystems where there's more and more data that companies are collecting. They're trying to figure out what data has value in it. Can you talk a bit about data democratization and some of the things that you're doing there at Rolls-Royce to collect more data, make it more accessible to your business professionals, your data science community, in order to get some insights out of it?
Yeah, absolutely. A bit like you, Chris. So I think you must have done lots of BI projects as well. So back in the day, I did lots of BI projects, and I genuinely used to have long hair, and I used to use hair straighteners. And anyone who's ever been SSBI or starting to load really large data sets, it's really cost us a lot of our hair, those kind of projects. And I think that's what's really nice about today is, for me in the past, enterprise BI, integration tooling, the marketeers created this great vision of what it was going to do and how it was going to allow everybody to do analytics themselves. But the reality wasn't the same. The reality was the integration tools took a long time to get data loaded in. The reality was that however big your database was, it was never big enough,
Yeah.
And the reality of the analytics tools is they were too complicated for someone who wanted something simple, but too simple for someone who wanted something complicated. And I really think that that's what's changed now with modern technology. And I think Azure, Power BI, Databricks, a lot of these kinds of technology changes have really allowed us to think about how we can democratize data better. So one of the things that I think people found counterintuitive when I arrived at Rolls-Royce was, there was a big kind of push to let's create a giant data lake, let's put everything in the data lake, categorize all the data in the data lake, and then in 3 years' time, when we finish building the data lake, we can get some value from it. And we I guess from my background in a .com, minimum viable products, those kind of things, we kind of span it the other way, and they said, well, can't you use like the tool that comes with the system? So if it's like SAP, can you not just use Lumira? Well, yeah, I could use Lumira. Okay, well, why don't you use Lumira then? You don't need to extract all the data, put it over here, lose all the security model, try and re-implement, all of those things that come through. So for me, I always push use the native tool where you can. But I think that the real thing that is different is where the native tool can't do it because you want to merge in other data sets, then what I always do is say, rather than kicking off a big initiative to create a data pipeline, make everything productionized, why don't you just do something minimum viable product, right? Just prove the value. Just create something, Power BI, extract some data, use Databricks, whatever it is, but create an ad hoc one-off way of doing it and prove that works first, and prove that you get the insights that you want and that there is value. And then if you do, and I think it's probably 50-50, right? I think sometimes people do that work and they realize there wasn't a correlation, right? Or the answer isn't what they want it to be. So they'll chuck it away, right? And then I guess once you've proven the value, if there's something there, then productionize it, and I think that was a real change. I think when I joined Rolls-Royce, our start point was, I want to create this thing in production that'll last forever. And of course, they're the most expensive ways of doing it. And now we've switched to do it in the native tool. If you can't do it in the native tool, Databricks, Power BI, non-productionized, minimum viable product, get the value. And then if there's really value ongoing, then let's look at a data supply chain. Let's look at making something that's more repeatable, because by the way, the run cost of that is much, much higher. And I think that's really changed the way that people think about it. And it's almost made Power BI not a dirty word, right? Because I think in some companies it's deemed as shadow IT or all of those kinds of things, right? It's prove the value, right, before we productionize it.
And given that you're in a regulated environment, right, you're collecting data from aircraft engines, and those aircraft engines fly on commercial jets, and people's lives are at risk, and so they need to perform well. Can you talk a little bit about, as you think about innovation and collecting data and gaining new insights, what do you need to do for the environment that you're deploying these things into to ensure that safety is first, as I'm sure it's a top priority?
And that's it. One of the phrases that summarizes Rolls-Royce is trusted to deliver excellence, right? And I think that we absolutely take that to heart in everything we do. You know, there's some of the applications that my team write, they are safety critical applications. So they go through an external governance from the aviation authorities to say, yes, you can adopt that model to predict the life of an engine, to predict the life of a part. So the governance that we go through at Rolls-Royce is probably much higher than I could have dreamt of when I was in one of those small agile startups. And I think that that's really important. The second thing we've done is to create a data passport process. So we understand the lineage of all of the data. Where did it come from? What can it be used for? And then where are we going to put it? So any data that comes into Rolls-Royce from an engine, from a customer, or some data that we generate from those data sets goes through a very, very consistent process where it's reviewed to make sure that, yes, we can take that data and we can put it there because it's not military, or it is military, or it's export control compliant. And then once we've done that, we have to understand what have our customers given us permission to do with that data. And again, make sure that we honor those commitments that we make. So our passporting process is a really, really important part of us knowing what data is where and where can it go. But by having such rigor in that passport, once it's in the right place, actually we have a little bit more flexibility to work, and we have more agility in what we do. So at Rolls-Royce, our data supply chains being reliable, understood, and effective, that gives us the ability to be agile. You know, we don't have agility in the sense that maybe startups have in that way. I think the final piece really is, I'm a person who fights against the concept of shadow IT. So do I want someone to go and create a crazy access database that does what SAP does? Well, no, okay. But do I want to give a user that's probably a little bit more of an expert than average and give them access to Databricks and give them access to some of our data stores? Absolutely, right? So that person has now found a new ceiling, they can learn more, and they might become one of our data scientists of the future or do some advanced analytics. You know, so for me, it's really encouraging the business users to be able to do more for themselves, right? It's, you know, I have a background coming from marketplaces, and you know, one of the things you learn in marketplaces, you can't write the features fast enough, right? You have to rely on third parties, the community, to deploy features and move it along, move the platform along so you can keep up. So being able to enable the people in Rolls-Royce to do things for themselves is a really, really important thing. And I remember one of the things you and I talked about, Chris, where you were talking about, you know, having to train some of your data scientists who used to be maybe data engineers, or, you know, having to bring those people through. And I promise you, we've got the opposite problem in Rolls-Royce. Everybody's got a nuclear physics degree, astrophysics degree. You know, our engineers want to write code, want to write really advanced algorithms, advanced models. They're really accustomed to fluid dynamics and aerodynamics and thermal. So actually what I've tried to do within Rolls-Royce is give people the tools so they can do it in the safer way, right? So make it easier for them to do it the way I would like them to do it, than to kind of write some crazy macro in Excel that I'm sure we've probably had out there in the past. So yeah, for me, it's really about empowering people. And I think empowering people is making it easier for them to do it the right way, making it easier for them to choose the right tool, rather than, you know, stopping them, berating them, because they just find another way anyway, right? These people are super, super smart.
So Stuart, for other executives that are in similar roles, you know, one of the challenges that I saw leading a data engineering function at a top 10 bank is there's this tension between the engineering department and the line of business, where, you know, the engineering department is trying to build a suite of tools or an ecosystem that supports all of the use cases, has all of the data management functions, the lineage, that passport of data that you talked about. And the line of business at the same time needs to run a P&L. And so the shadow IT, I think, emerges because there's this bit of tension between the time to delivery, speed to market from the engineering team, and what insights the business might need. But the risks, I think, from my perspective, I'd love to hear your feedback, is oftentimes the environments that are being done in the shadow IT are not full production. They don't have, maybe perhaps access to the right data. The security controls are not in place. And then probably most importantly is they won't scale when they need to go to production, or they may not be, the code quality may not be exactly where you need it to be. So can you talk a little bit about what advice you would give to somebody that's in your type of role where they're seeing this phenomenon take place in their organization?
Yeah, and I think my background again has helped me. I think in large businesses, IT said no would be acceptable. Yeah, whereas in mine, when you work in startups that are hyper growth, there is no, right? There's always a way. We just need to work it out. And I think that my attitude being that at the start, I think it scared my team a little bit, because they're like, oh, saying no was our way. So now we're going to have to come up with a smarter answer. And I think we managed it, which is we created a team that's only small, it's less than 10 people, but that is dedicated to people to help them self-serve, so do it in the right way. And they're only dedicated to providing the tools for them to do it in a supported way. So we've provided Databricks for some of our data analytics. We've provided the Power Platform so they can build a Power App. We've provided Power BI on the Power Platform. Power BI can actually be pointed at Databricks. Power BI seems to be able to connect to everything in SAP, So what we've really tried to do is say, we will make it easier if you use these tools. I think the number one thing that team has produced, other than this lovely, safe environment where people can put their app, put their model, put their analytic, is they've also been really clever, and they've created a design style guide that you can, when you open the Power Platform or some visualization software, you basically load a load of themes. So they basically instantly makes your report look beautiful, right? So it's a full design system. It helps people make things look beautiful. But we only support that on the systems that we want you to use, right? So it really helps people find their way. It's like the breadcrumbs that help them find their way to our supported way of doing things. And I think that's really, really important. But what I would never do to somebody is say, just because you don't want to do it our way, you're on your own, because that's still wrong, right? Those people have still got to deliver for that business unit and still help our customers achieve. So you've still got to be careful. But yeah, one of the challenges that we still have today, and it's very difficult, is we have a lot of engineers who want to use R. We have a lot who want to use some of the other analytics, MATLAB, that's what I was trying to think of. So the people who want to use MATLAB, and actually we want them to use Python and PySpark, right? So it is a convergence that has to happen. But I guess I go back to my original story of trying to convince the .NET developer to switch from bespoke .NET to Java on a kind of off-the-shelf platform. Is I think you've got to make it easier for them to make that transition rather than black and white force them to, because they almost dig their heels in more, right? But the more we provide the design system, the more we provide tools that are highly scalable, the more we say, well, you can do that on your laptop, but it takes like 19 hours, where if you put it in Azure, it takes 3 seconds. The more of a reason that people are going to wander towards your tool and make the changes. And they work out that actually it's not that different after all, and it's something that they can really buy into. So yeah, for me, it's create a team that empowers people and give that team a strict remit that they must not do it for someone. So they mustn't say, oh, I'll build you a Power App, or I'll build you a model, or I'll build you an analytic. I think that's a really important part of how you get that self-serve culture together.
So Stuart, Rolls-Royce has a really interesting model in terms of the way in which you make money in the aviation space for aircraft engines. It's by the hour, as I understand it, in terms of usage. And so the company is really incentivized to keep these engines running and keep them in flight. So it really, the modeling that you and your teams do for determining mean time between failures and making sure that you've got the supply chain for the parts to repair engines as they need to. The engines are in the right location geographically. You've got the repair teams in place, or they're trained up through, the aircraft the aircraft company. Can you give us some sense of how that modeling works and how it really ties into, the P&L of the company?
Yeah, so our servitization, right? Anyone who does servitization ends up with the Rolls-Royce as a case study, because I think 20 years ago that we were the first to kind of pioneer in this way. It's really important to start with that. Yes, we do try and extend the time on wing, so the engine to fly longer, but we go nowhere near the safety barriers, right? So this is about within a very, very highly regulated safety industry. So just to kind of put that caveat on it. But yeah, everything that my team does really is forecasting to make sure that the total care product that we sell to our customers is going to behave and work for the customer, and also obviously work for us and deliver the revenue that we meet. So we do some unbelievable things. So, we can work with an airline to say, where do you think this aeroplane will fly from and to? And then we will forecast for the next 30 years that route, how much it will cost them in fuel, what maintenance that we'll need, which months they will need that maintenance in. And really, it's a bit like buying a car and know everything that car is going to have to do as the customer from a repair, maintenance, overhaul kind of angle. From our internal side, we can also tell you which parts we would have to buy, where that inventory would have to fly to and be when we need to do the repair, how much it would cost, and do a financial forecast, because obviously we're a FTSE 100 company, so we have a lot of audit around our finances, and that's a really key part of it as well. So yeah, it's an incredibly complicated forecasting process that we do. If we think about the mechanism, we have a component called the blue data thread. So that brings engine data in. So when the plane lands, we take a lot of data. On our newest engine, it's about 0.5 gig of data per engine, per plane, per flight. So you can see a significant amount. If you look at some of the older engines, the data fits on a floppy disk, right? So there's a real difference in what we get. And we do also get some data live. So we have a one-way stream from the plane into Rolls-Royce at certain points in the flight. And on the more modern aeroplanes, these will become more frequent, and more data loads and sends will happen, but it's very, very expensive, right? These things are 40,000 feet in the air. So we get the data in, we import it in through Azure, some data pipelines, we do some stream analytics, we do some batch analytics, and we run some diagnostic networks on those, on the data that's coming in. And then we assess some of the alerts where things are out of what we would see as a parameter with humans or with other models, or humans with models, to make sure that we take the right action based on the safety spec that we have for that engine. That can be when it lands, we work with the aircraft maintenance team to make sure that something is done. It could be an inspection, but it's all the time what we're trying to do is make sure that when the aeroplane wants to take off, that it doesn't not take off because of a Rolls-Royce engine, right? That's a really important thing, whilst of course safety being the most important factor in that.
So Stuart, we've talked about, data democratization, the architecture, the way in which data moves, the governance components of that, and how you need to keep a good check on the data. You talked about the data passport, you talked about the data science teams and the type of talent that you've been able to hire and bring into the organization that are, PhD level, curious people. Can you give us an example of, a project that you're working on now that kind of combines all these things and some of the lessons learned and how it's moved innovation forward?
At Rolls-Royce, our data science team is called R Squared, and we create what are called challenges. So anyone in the business, from someone in the lowest roles to the most senior people, can raise a kind of innovation challenge. we've created this concept called digital value premium. So it basically means like, what is it worth if we do this? It could be cash saving, it could be cash avoidance, it could even be revenue generated. And people push ideas into this, and then the data scientists pick them up in hopefully a sensible order. So, one day you might be looking at what we talked about in gathering data on ticket sales. Another day you might be taking some temperature data from one of our ovens that we do casting in, and we worked out that if a blade was in this position, it would have more of an opportunity to have a problem in quality than if we put it in this position. And just really taking these challenges that people couldn't do self-serve, right? They couldn't do it if with self-service tools, with democratized data. These are really specialist skills that people have and that you need to hook into. But almost like making the backlog of those people democratized, right? So the best idea is what they work on. The idea that's going to generate the most value is what they work on. And I think that's really exciting, ideas that enable us to keep the engine on the wing longer. So it's less disruption to the airline, it's less disruption to customers. These are great things, but actually helping our general business make better decisions, I think, is just as important. When COVID hit, we found it really difficult to know what the engine flying hour revenues were going to be, because we didn't know people were going to fly, whether they weren't going to fly, which airplanes were going to fly, which airplanes weren't. And what's great about Rolls-Royce is there's always like 52 smart people who can tell you how it's really obvious what we should do, right? So the obvious answer was to go and get some data from the web. How many people are looking at on travel sites? How many people are looking at flights? What's the booking conversion rate on a flight? And then tie that data set up with what tickets have been sold. So we start to see what's the difference between the number of users looking for a flight, what tickets have been sold, and then try and marry the tickets that have been sold to the scheduled flights. Because one of the things that happened during COVID is that the airlines would keep 3 flights in the schedule, and then on the last minute, they'd merge them all onto one plane and then just say to everybody, I'm not getting on that flight. So for us, it was really, really difficult to know how many engine flying hours we're going to have. And of course, that's a really important part of our business. We were able to gather all those data sets in, chuck them into a big blob into Azure, and really start to do some analytics on that and get going really quickly. And what was amazing for me was our chief customer officer, our sales director, coming to me singing the praises of my team. We've never had such visibility. I didn't even know that this could be done, and there's a Friday meeting, and it's one of the best attended, where it's just, what's the next thing we're going to do? What's the next thing we're going to do? And you got 3, 4, 5 of the most senior directors in Rolls-Royce attending this call. The CFO even attends the call, right? And, wow. Something that comes from what data scientists are doing and saying, we've looked at this, we've compared our engines to Boeing's engines, we've compared our flights to Boeing flights, we've looked at planes that have Rolls-Royce engines versus planes that have non-Rolls-Royce engines. It's a really incredible thing that opened up by just having that new problem and that new way of looking at it, and having kind of infinite compute, right? And having really powerful tools that allow you to do data analytics.
So Stuart, one of the things that we aim to do with this series of champions of data and AI is to help other aspiring people in our field, what lessons learned can we give them? And so when we think about where we are today in our careers, what advice would we be giving ourselves, coming out of university? So if you can touch on that.
Yeah, I hope my peers and my colleagues don't mind me saying this. I think that one of the things that it took me a few years to learn is that the senior leadership team isn't really a team. It's a collection of individuals who've got very, very clear accountability and responsibility for a specific area, but they're very loosely coupled as a team, right? So I think when you're lower down the organization, you're looking up and you see this great team, they must do everything together, make every decision together, but it's just not like that at an executive level. executive level, you are a loosely collected group of people with a shared set of outcomes and objectives. Why is that really important? Well, I think it's really important because one of the mistakes you can make is trying to be in their group, because actually you're trying to be in a group that doesn't really exist, right? You know, these are people who are friendly, professional, work together, but you know, the shared goal is the success of the company. So how can you do it differently? And I think that this is a little bit of, you know, after the fact, this is what I learned, but I've always been promoted the day after I succeeded after running at the fire. So wherever the big fire was, that one of the very senior directors was concerned about, is I would drop in, get in there, take accountability for it, fix it, and then come out and make that person look good, right? And actually that person 9 out of 10 times would then say, oh, Stuart's a great guy, let's promote him. And I've kind of just gone round in my life doing exactly that, right? Where's the fire? Okay, I've got a great extinguisher. I'll go and put it out. And it's always, always, always helped me. And I know that that's like the ante of what the personnel or the HR or the people part of the department would tell you, which is, you know, you have to plan your career and you have to think about everything in minute detail, right? To me, it's not that. Is you need to deliver great outcomes. And actually, the biggest outcome that any senior person is going to want is something that is removing the current thing that they've got that's on fire, right? So for me, that was a great strategy. Also, how did that help me? Well, you know, one of the things that happens when you go to executive recruitment is, well, there's a few things that I didn't expect, right? The first thing is you do lots of personality tests, numeracy tests. You know, maybe most people know that's going to happen, maybe they don't. The next thing is you then get interviewed by a psychologist for 4 hours. Now that's scary, right? When you've never done that before. So you're kind of like, oh my God, you know, everybody has insecurities, right? You're like, well, this person's going to get in my head and find those things. And actually, you know, what having those great firefighting outcomes has given you is you have a real solid sense of confidence that whatever happens, I'll work out the answer. And actually what they're really looking for is someone who's super solid, right? Someone who, I know this person is going to be able to do that. Yeah, someone who talks about going in and achieving quite big outcomes, right? So I did something and it changed the outcome of the company. And again, that's a really key thing that people are looking in an executive recruitment process is they're looking for people who are going to come up, we can call it a strategy or come up with a vision or something that will change and then drive that through to execution. And they're looking for great examples, right? And, you know, when I was coach people, I say, please don't tell me that we ran out of pens and you went and got some pens, right? What I want to know is we had a digital workplace strategy. It meant that we rolled out Teams to 2,000 people in 4 days, and that enabled us to then start working when at the time we couldn't work. You know, those are the things, the great examples that get you through that executive recruitment process. You know, I had a really strange experience in one of my first executive recruitment processes, which was for a company called TUI, which I think are the biggest package holiday company in the world. And the person said to me, oh, you're the next generation of CTO. You're like this is where this disruptive thing came from, right? And I didn't even say that. Those weren't my words. Those were his words. And actually, that was kind of cool for me, right? Because I picked up what he said and it gave me the confidence to just be me. So I talked about how I behave and how I do things. And, you know, I think it can be, it's a really common piece of advice, you know, be authentic, be yourself. But, you know, for me, it's be authentic, be yourself, but talk about the outcomes, talk about the change that you drove. Give them a reason to put you through to the next round of that recruitment, because I think that's a really important part of it. And for me, you know, I often get feedback that you're a very technical CIO or a very technical CTO or CDO, but they always give me the job, right? So they say that with an element of negativity, but then they always give me the job. And I think that's something, be proud if you're a technologist to be a technologist, because I think that might be what people are looking for. And I think my final piece of advice is, my personal view is that if people are T-shaped, the long, deep bit is your skill, and mine is technology, right? I understand technology right down from the database, APIs, writing code, architectures. That's just me, right? And that's what I enjoy most. So maybe that's what gets me the role, right? Showing people innovative, disruptive, different things, talking with passion about the outcomes that we've driven. But I think what keeps you in the role or allows you to go further on is the breadth, right? So, it's very easy to overplay I'm a great technologist, so I'm just going to answer all technology questions, and that'll just frustrate people. You won't be seen as a team player. So I think, yes, your technology or your technical skill might get you the role, but actually it's the breadth that keeps you in the role or allows you to move up within the company, or it's the breadth that becomes your reputation in the company. And in Good to Great, there's a kind of a concept of level 5 leader, and I would never say that I've achieved it, but I honestly do try and achieve some of the goals that it talks about. I see where I am in the world now about coaching and helping people, not some of the things that I found as negative that people would say to me, you're bad at this, you're good at that, you need to change this. Helping people understand that in that context, the way you reacted wasn't the right way, but actually, the way you reacted would be really useful in this other context. So don't stop, right? So use what you did in that context, but in this context, and then have a conversation with them about, maybe how could we have done it differently? What were they trying to achieve? What was the outcome? And I think that coaching other people as you get more and more senior, it's the bit you have to enjoy, right? You're more and more detached from the day-to-day pressing the keys or the delivery. I always joke with people that most of the things on my CV recently, I didn't do, right? I just led the teams that led the teams that led the teams, but actually I'm really proud that I did lead the teams, right? And I coached and I mentored and I helped them. And now I just see my job as removing the obstacles before they even get to them. I see my job as always working kind of 6 months ahead, thinking about what obstacles are going to get in the way of delivery in 6 months' time, and making sure that I help clear them out of the way before they even knew they were going to be a problem. And I think that maybe that's the difference in the Stuart now versus the one that just got annoyed with management making stupid decisions. What I can't go back to being that delivery technical person, but what I can do is try and clear the road for people to have an easier life, right? Because, working in IT, working in technology, it's not easy, right? It's difficult, it's not repeatable. It's not like we work in a plant that generates the same thing over and over again. It's very artistic, very creative. And I don't think many people understand that, right? And I think that's something that, that I like to hold dear, that I can clear the road and help these people have an easier ride, because I know how tough it is to be in a development team.
Yeah, so it sounds like, in summary, really sort of 3 things. The first was, don't be afraid to work on the really hard projects and ones that have the potential to fail, but be one of those people that can help rescue those projects and make them successful. The second is to, while you're very deep in a particular area, make sure that you pay attention to the broader skill set that you need to succeed inside of an organization and integrate in with the management there. And then as you become a manager and start leading teams, be that force multiplier, mentor those teams, take pride in leading them, even if you're not doing the hands-on stuff anymore, because you're going to lead people to be able to succeed with those big projects that you were working on earlier in your career.
Absolutely. And I think if you do those 3 things, you'll be seen as different, right? And I think that's a really positive thing. I think that the next generation of people isn't the same as the last generation of people. And I think that, if I can help change things and move things forward, I think that's a really important part of what we're doing.
Awesome. Well, Stuart, thank you. Everyone, Stuart Hughes again with Rolls-Royce. Appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll be chatting again in the future.
Thanks very much, Chris.
Thank you for joining this episode of Champions of Data and AI, brought to you by Databricks. Thousands of data leaders rely on Databricks to simplify data and AI, so data teams can innovate faster and solve the world's toughest problems. Visit Databricks.com to learn how data leaders are unlocking the true potential of all their data.